Thank you, Sachin, and everyone here. So my family's actually from Bangalore and Tumkur. So I was born and raised in the U.S., but like the guy from the hotel told me yesterday, I sound like I'm from somewhere else, but my face is from here. So I took that as a compliment, and it's great to see brothers and sisters here. The last time I was here was actually 20 years ago. But the time I was here, what I learned about the social movements in India, the courage, the endurance, the boldness, the scope, the scale, inspired and fueled the work that I do in the US. So for me to be here with you all, this Agami community, as you embark on this new journey to reimagine justice, is just profoundly moving for me, and I just, with my deepest gratitude, I thank you. I'm going to start by bringing you to my hometown of San Jose, California. And what you're looking at is people waiting in line to get into our court. And if you don't work at the court, going to that institution is likely the most anxiety-filled, stress-filled, fearful moment of your life. So everyone waiting in this line has these questions of, once I step through these doors, am I going to go to jail and prison? Will I get out? What will happen to my family? Will I have a defense attorney that will fight vigorously for me? And I spent a couple days ago at the courts, the session courts here in Bangalore, and the magistrate courts here in Bangalore with Trisha. Is she here? Make wave your hand. Who was nice enough to escort me and tell me what was going on. And I can't help but wonder if that same feeling in San Jose is what happens when people go to court here in India. When they walk into that institution, is there a feeling of being trapped where you don't get to chart the course what happens to you next? That this machine has sucked me up and it will do what it's going to do and I have no agency to control it. And I say that with a lot of self-criticism to myself and my organization because I come from a movement organization. We fought for people's rights, for immigrant rights, worker rights. We fought against police abuse. But when people we cared about would be charged with a criminal offense and have to go and wait in that line, we relinquished power of collective action. And we let them face that institution, that system, alone. The results are those numbers that you've probably read about. Over 2 million people currently incarcerated in the United States. And after seeing families and communities devastated, people we cared about ripped away from us, we decided to be irreverent to this idea. Because what was holding us back, what was self-containing us, wasn't police, it wasn't a system that said you couldn't be here or put armed guards or fences around it. We were limiting ourselves because we thought we're not lawyers and the courts is not our arena to make change. And so we decided to be irreverent to this idea that only lawyers and judges can make changes in the courts. And we developed a model that we call participatory defense, a practice for families whose loved ones are facing criminal charges to impact the outcome of those cases and collectively transform the landscape of power in the courts. What we're doing is what I learned about 20 years ago here in Bangalore, of how we could flex collective power of community organizing so that we could take the institutions off in the neck of people we cared about. And in every other aspect of public life, we know this science and ethic works. What we did was take that know-how and overlay it on top of a criminal court system that had been really insulated from community power. So how many of you were in Manish's exercise yesterday of the structures and the sculptures? Make some noise. So for those of you that weren't there yesterday, we went through this really moving experience where we had to physically manifest the prison system with our bodies. And we each had different roles, like there's an inmate, there was a prison guard, etc. One of the characters was the family of someone in prison. And in that physical manifestation, all the key characters were huddled around each other, trying to navigate their way. and the family member of the person in jail was far away, huddled, curled up in a ball, faced the other direction. And in the exercise, they had to say one singular sentence. And the sentence that he said is, "I don't know what to do." And that resonated so deeply for me. And it's such a profound truth because, of course, he wouldn't know what to do. There is no "my loved one got arrested" school. We don't take those classes. And so what we realized we could do, though, with that new science is develop something that is replicable, that is easy to access. And what participatory defense looks like is basically a weekly meeting model. So everyone that you're seeing either is facing incarceration or has a loved one that's facing incarceration. And what they're doing is they're writing the names of their loved ones on a board because people are held under trial. We call it pre-trial in the US, but the numbers are comparable. And they're going through each name to find tactical ways to impact the outcome of the case. So those meetings are half support groups, and they're also half strategic planning sessions. So every week, families are finding ways to impact the case by reviewing police reports and pointing out inconsistencies and lies. They're coming up with defense theories. They're coming up and securing evidentiary material that could be helpful to the defense. And they're figuring out ways to tell the fuller story of their loved one. They're making what we call social biography packets, which are these packets of photos and letters and certificates that tell the fuller truth of someone beyond just a criminal offense, a case file. And they're making social biography videos, because everything's a video now, right? And these are 8 to 10-minute documentaries that the families and communities make that help people understand what the life was like before the alleged incident, what the potential future could be after. And it's a way to break the sterility of the court, to figuratively dissolve the walls of the courtroom and bring a judge out of that court and into the community. And for the community to penetrate that court by their own terms. There was a word that I've learned in the last 2 days that I'm bringing back home, a Hindi word, insanyat. Did I say that right? Okay, my mom would get mad at me if I didn't. But what they're doing is trying to bring some insanyat to a court system, a prison system, that inherently is dehumanizing. It is a revolutionary act that has a tangible, urgent reality, is an activity on a to-do list. And the impact has been transformative. So for the people that come to these meetings, that have been told you're not a lawyer, that have been met at the courthouse with armed guards, bailiffs, that see a judge that for some reason sits 8 feet higher than everyone and wears a robe for no reason at all, and told that you have no power. Through these meetings, through this organizing, they do something that as a community organizer is the key cornerstone. They become more powerful in the face of a system that is trying to strip them of power and voice and agency. And the impact wasn't just for families that came. We saw measurable outcomes on cases. We saw charges get dismissed. We saw acquittals and trials won, appeals won, sentences significantly reduced or changed into non-custody time, meaning you're not living in a cage. And one of the key kind of first lessons that we learned in doing that insanyat work came from us sitting in sentencing hearings. And who here has been to a sentencing hearing? So we sat through a lot, and we were holding hands with families, and we had walked with them for years waiting to get to this point. And we sat with them as their loved one faced 30 years to life, 40 years to life. And when we walked back to the car, the common refrain that people said wasn't, I hate that judge, or man, my lawyer sucked. I mean, they say those things too. But the most common refrain they'd say is, I wish they knew him like I know him. That was the impulse they wanted. And for us, that was then a charge. We had to create the tools to allow that family member who's crouched in the corner saying, I don't know what to do, to transform into an essential and effective extension of the defense team. not to be pseudo-lawyers, to speak from the authority and power of family. And so one of the first social biography packets we made was actually kind of like a photo essay. It was of a friend named Carnell who'd come to the weekly meetings. He had taken a plea already, which means he admitted to the crime. It was a low-level drug offense, but because of his priors, he was facing a minimum of 5 years in prison. The judge had already indicated at sentencing, the lowest I'll go is 5 years. And Carnell said, look, I could do the time, but if I go in, they're going to take my girls. Carnell was a single father, so it meant that if he was detained and incarcerated, the system would essentially take control of his daughters. And so we principally knew him as a dad. He came to every meeting, and there's a park across the street, so he'd take the girls to the park across the street. And so we gave him a camera and said, just take pictures of what it's like being a father. And so he took pictures of taking the girls to school and making them breakfast and doing homework and taking them to after-school programs, tucking them in at night. And it became this photo essay that his attorney then used at the sentencing hearing. And the judge, who already indicated the lowest of a 5-year prison sentence, now understood Carnell as more than just a criminal offense. He knew him as a father. He knew the consequence of the detention. And he turned that 5-year prison sentence into a 6-month outpatient program. So that Carnell could be with his girls, and his daughters would have a father in their lives. And Carnell's oldest daughter, who's just outside of frame, who wasn't much older than these girls, is now in college. Now, the likelihood of the generational suffering that would have happened if Carnell went to jail would have been absolute. All of that was halted by the story, the enseignement of that family. And so as we started doing this work and more families started coming, because the way it happened was people would tell each other in jail, hey, you should go to this meeting, my friend goes, and they would tell their uncle, their auntie, and then someone's mom. And then people would come, and the first thing they'd say when they came into the meeting is, which one's the lawyer? Because the presumption is only the lawyer has the power to make that change. And so we would tell them, there isn't a lawyer here. This is about you being the agent of change. And now look, if you sit on your hands and do nothing, which is what most people are sort of trained to do, the system is designed to give your loved one time served. That's the language the system uses to quantify time of incarceration. But if you engage, if you participate, you can turn time served into time saved. That's them home with you, living the life they should be living. And sure enough, that skepticism would start to wash off. And when we started telling other community touchstones, you could do this too, there would still be some skepticism, not just from lawyers, from the community that said we actually have the potential to act. And so we made that time-saved framework that we tell people at meetings into a metric. And so Carnell, for example, would represent 5 years of time saved from incarceration. When we totaled the numbers just after 2 years, we had 1,862 years of time saved from incarceration. And it wasn't just the individual cases. As you all know, organizing is about power building. And so what was happening with families is that they're finally seeing under the hood of a court system that was totally mysterious before. And they found strategic places where their collective power can make systemic change. One of the things that I was most struck with when I looked at incarceration in India was the plague of undertrials. How many people who are legally innocent are held in a cage? And the numbers are comparable in the US. Our jails are filled with nearly 70% of the people there that are under trial, meaning they have not been convicted of a crime, because they simply could not afford the bail amount to come home. And so there's been changes in the US as of the last year. So in my state of California, there was some litigation done by some excellent lawyers that said that constitutionally you should not be allowed to keep someone just because they don't have the ability to pay. But as you know, just because there's a law on paper does not mean that's going to automatically translate to freedom, right? And so what we did is we wanted to make sure the courts, the judges knew that we were going to hold them accountable to this new standard. So I'm going to show you a very short video. Mainly this is my excuse to show you some of my friends. But let me see if this plays.
We're here in front of Santa Clara County Courthouse, and we're here to let families know about the newest decision that reforms bail, and we're also spreading the word around bigger legislation in California called SB 10. After this action, we're also going to be going into the courthouse to let system players know that we're here and we want our loved ones home with us.
The Humphrey case said that the bail system is a tax on the poor. It said that the way in which the judicial system has been dealing with bail is patently illegal.
This decision for me means that my son will be able to come home and fight for himself on the outside.
You have about 70% of the people that are currently in California detention center, they're only there because they cannot afford bail.
As many of you know, when you fight your case from the out, you have a much higher chance of winning your case. We understand what it means to be detained, separated from our families and children, and that asking our loved ones to try to find money for bail for us is literally taking food off of our baby's plates.
This impacts, families, parents who have children. This impacts the mentally ill. This impacts, all of us as a community.
We're going to be giving out information regarding health decision where family members can go back to court, have a new hearing to be let out on bail. People is in jail right now because they can't afford to get out. And the Humphrey decision helps family.
And all of us who have interacted in any way with a loved one who's been incarcerated or been in the clutches of the criminal justice system know firsthand that money bail has nothing to do with public safety.
We're doing this across the state. There are groups just like us that believe in a California just like us that has had enough, and they're out in front of the courts as well.
People out of jail and money bail. Let's free our people out of jail and money bail. Let's free our people out of jail and money bail. Let's free our people out of jail and money bail.
So those were groups and communities that we train in participatory defense up and down California. And the first time in California history, as far as I know, we all had a coordinated action and rallies on the same day in the same moment, calling for the freedom of our people and an end to the unjust practices of under trials. And what I like about the action itself, the rallies itself, is that in a lot of ways it was a reclamation of space. If you notice, it was right in front of the courthouses. It was right in front of those places that I said is the most intimidating place. And it was people saying we are reclaiming this in power and in hope and in justice. And so from that day, it didn't end there. What through participatory defense we did is we all went into court, not just that day, but every week after that, up and down California, to hold judges accountable, to let them know that the public was watching them, knew what the new standard was going to hold them to that new standard, and they had to abide by the new law of the land. And it was a shifting of the power balance. And it wasn't only simply playing that role. Communities can be innovators, can be creators. And so what we said was this under trial situation doesn't only have to be about a judge employing money bail on someone or keeping them in jail. There's a third option altogether outside of that dichotomy, and that's the community. And so we created something called the Community Release Project. I'd be interested in talking to people here about it, which was telling judges, look, if your concern is them coming back to court, is you concern to them public safety. Our community touchstones, our groups, will help this person get back to court. We'll do the reminder calls. We'll drive them if they need it. We'll help them with employment and housing and any of the other ancillary issues that get in the way of people having a successful adjudication. And we're having people come home without having to pay $1. I'm talking about people that had $1 million, $2 million bails turned into zero simply by leaning on the strength of the community. And so we started training. Whoa, oh my Lord. Got me confused. So these are some of the other hubs that we trained across the country. So what we started doing in California, we've now shared across the US. And so there's Philadelphia, it's a mother's group. In Boston, it's a group of people that were formerly incarcerated. In Nashville, it's a family center. So the embodiment takes many shapes and forms. And what we know through innovation is sometimes it's not about creating something totally new that is totally foreign to people's thinking. Sometimes the most effective and purposeful innovation is simply tapping into an instinct that already exists, that people are given license to act upon an impulse that they already had. And that's why we saw this thing catch fire all across the country. And so you could see our time saved numbers are now something north of 7,000 years. So they're saving families, bringing them together. And you know, in most occupations, what you try to do is show that you're exceptional. You're the best doctor around. You're the best lawyer around. But in this work that we're doing, in the social innovation change work, you show your acumen by showing how many others can do exactly what you do. That is what power is. That's how you make change makers. And so when you think about that first image I showed you, the forlorn looks, it's really just a matter of shifting and pivoting perspective. That the people walking into court, whether here in Bangalore or in Tumkur or in San Jose, need not be the fodder of incarceration, need not be on that treadmill that simply keeps going until they're locked in a cage. And just a shift of perspective from an Agami lens and framework, they may not be the people that fill the prisons, but maybe the change makers that put an end to incarceration entirely and create a whole new vision of justice for people here in India, in the US, and across the globe. Thank you for your time today.